So let's get started. All right, so what do we know about muscular strength? Why do we need muscular strength? Let's define it first. Let's start there. So what is muscular strength? Muscular strength is the ability to generate maximal force. It's the ability for a group or a single muscles to generate maximal force, right? It's the amount of weight that a muscle can lift also during one max effort. So an example for those of you that go to the gym, this would be equivalent to doing a 1 rep max at a squat, at a bench press, at a Smith machine, whatever exercise you decide to do, but it's how much weight can you do for 1 rep, right? That's going to be what's going to get us to measure muscular strength. Why else do we need muscular strength? Well, having muscular strength increases resting metabolic rate. And what does this mean? Well, resting metabolic rate is the amount of energy that our body expends. It's the calories we burn, right? This includes the energy supplied for heat, respiratory muscles like your lungs, and body tissue. A higher metabolic rate is a sign of an increased lean tissue muscle mass. This allows the body to burn more calories at rest during the day. So to simplify that a little bit, what is being said here on this PowerPoint is that the more muscle mass you have, the stronger you will be. The stronger you are, the more muscle mass you have. And why you kind of need muscular strength is because it's going to help you burn calories sooner, quicker, at a more efficient rate. Conversely, on the opposite end, a lower metabolic rate is going to burn fewer calories, leading to weight gain, increased fat mass, right? And these are things we don't want for our patients, clients, athletes, friends and family. When we give this advice, like we want people to strength train. This is something that is going to help improve our well-being in the long term. It's going to help increase bone density mass. It's also going to help maintain muscle mass and muscular strength, which we know now helps keep your metabolic rate high, which in turn helps maintain the burning of calories throughout the day. And increasing about 1 pound of lean muscle mass, just to give you some perspective, elevates resting metabolism by 2 to 3%. A regular strength training program can also help promote health benefits. What do we see benefit-wise when we think about strength training? Well, it's going to reduce joint and muscle abnormalities, and it's going to reduce your rate of injuries, which if you're an athletic trainer or a sports performance coach, you know, the last thing we want is to have athletes that are injured or people or general population clients that are injured and can't participate in the activity. They can't do their sport. They can't help their team out. They can't come in and get themselves better, right? They can't come in and help you get money and continue their clientele under you. So these are benefits that are going to last them long term. And if they're injured, they cannot pay you. They cannot compete for their team. They cannot help their team win. So keep these things in mind. Strength training is something that delays the decrease of strength as we age, right? We all know as we get older, we get weaker. Our bones start to lose bone mass density. And part of that is also you lose your muscle mass, you lose strength with that. So strength training helps prevent osteoporosis, right? That's going based off what I was saying with your bone density mass. Strength training, resistance training, however you want to call it, that's going to allow our bodies to adapt to stresses and forces over time. That is going to help us prevent osteoporosis by improving bone mineral density. So those are just a few benefits and kind of the importance of why we do need muscular strength training. Now let's change the topic a little bit over to muscular endurance. And then as we continue in this PowerPoint, we'll see where these things kind of differ. Why do we need muscular endurance? Well, muscular endurance, let's define it first. Muscular endurance is the ability to generate force multiple times, right? So we're talking about multiple repetitions, something you can replicate. That's muscular endurance. And our rep ranges for that, we'll see later in the PowerPoint. But for a muscular strength test, remember how I said we usually do like a 1 to 3 rep max? That's going to test our muscular strength, right? It's how much you can move, how much load you can move, resistance you can move and work through for 1 rep, max effort, 1 rep, or 2 or 3, but usually it's a max effort, 1 rep. Whereas muscular endurance is the ability to generate force numerous times over multiple reps, moving a load and resistance many times, upwards of 10, 15, 20, 25 repetitions for a single exercise and a single movement. Exercises to increase muscular strength will also increase muscular endurance. This is where we get a little bit of like carryover and crossover with these two. As you train muscular strength, your muscular endurance will get better, because as you get stronger moving a certain load, right, over time you start to adapt to these stresses, right? This is called adaptation. This is called progressive overload. As you progressively begin to overload these muscles and these soft tissue structures, we will see an increase in muscular strength, which will carry over into our increase in muscular endurance. Exercising to increase muscular endurance, though, caveat here, will not increase muscular strength. So just because you can move a moderate to light weight 15 times doesn't mean that you'll be able to lift a heavier weight once, right? But the opposite is true. Like we see in the bullet point above, exercising to increase strength, right? If we can lift something real heavy once, that means we can lift a lighter weight many more times. That's going to carry over a little bit better. Let's review examples of both of these. So muscular strength and muscular endurance. Where do we see examples of this in our regular life? Climbing a flight of stairs. That's something people do every day. People have stairs in their homes, in their buildings, where their job is. Institutions, schools, malls in general, we use stairs to climb up all the time, right? This is going to be a better example of muscular endurance because we're doing 100 steps or 50 or whatever the case is, but it's 20 or more, 15 or more, numerous repetitions over a certain period of time. It usually is light to moderate loads. We're really only moving our body weight up the stairs. Whereas like an example for muscular endurance in our everyday lives would be moving heavy objects from one place to another. So how far can we push a fridge right down the hallway or something? A sled, let's take a sled, for example, in the gym, right? It's a real heavy weight, 200-300 pounds. How far can you move that? Or a heavy back squat, right? You got 250 pounds on your back on a barbell. Can you do that once? Can you do that twice, right? Once we start getting into 8, 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 repetitions, that's more muscular endurance. Whereas muscular strength is moving a heavy object from one place to another. Like I said, a fridge, picking up a fridge and moving it and dropping it in one location, one repetition. All right, let's talk a little bit about muscle structure, how muscles exactly work, how forces are applied, and how that network works together, where structure and function kind of meet. It's also going to be a little bit of review for anatomy, so please place close attention to this PowerPoint slide. So let's talk about this. Muscles apply force to bones, causing the body to. So we know that muscles are attached to our bones through tendons, and as muscles contract, lengthen, and shorten, right, they apply forces or create forces on bones that help our body move and ambulate through space and do everyday things or do sport-specific things. Muscles can only pull, like I said, remember, your muscles are attached to bones through tendons. So as the muscle contracts and that muscle belly shortens, depending on what muscle you're looking at, that's going to move the bone, right? So as that muscle pulls on the bone, it's going to cause movement. They act with one another nearby at a certain joint to move a limb in a desired direction in a certain space. Structure. So largest to smallest, like this is kind of the breakdown from bone, tendon, epimysium is going to be a type of soft tissue, connective tissue, perimysium, endomysium, a muscle bundle fascicle, and then we have single muscle cell fibers. So this is kind of a breakdown from biggest to smallest. So we see the bone is like more larger macro things we can feel, things we know, we can palpate. Whereas tendon is a little smaller. Epimysium is something harder to find. Perimysium is a little smaller. Muscle bundles are things that you can probably see under a microscope, and a single muscle cell fiber is something so small. So that just gives you a breakdown of the structure from biggest to smallest. We know now, because I've said it a few times in the slide, tendons connect to muscles to bones. So remember, muscle bellies shorten, contract. We see a contraction in the muscle. That's going to pull on the tendon, which is attached to the bone, which is going to cause movement. I'll talk a little bit about function, right? So we have motor unit. A motor unit is a single motor neuron, and all the muscle fibers it innervates. So a motor unit is going to innervate a bunch of muscle fibers, and that motor unit receives signals from the brain. And as this signal goes through all these muscle fibers that it innervates, it will allow us to cause some movement. As we recruit muscle fibers, and this happens in a blink of an eye, right? We see our brain send the message down to our motor unit, and this is going to spread out and disperse throughout the muscle that we're trying to activate or trying to use through ambulation. And this is going to cause us a contraction, which is initiated by an action potential that arrives at this junction of the cell, right? This is going to spread from the brain. It's going to work its way down into the muscle. It's going to spread out between all the innervations of that muscle from that motor unit. And we have two different types of movement that can cause, right? We have fine motor control, which are going to be your more smaller things like writing, very dexterous things that you use with your fingers, typing. Those are blinking, for example, is a fine motor movement. Recruiting few fibers, and if we're thinking about a more gross motor control, we're thinking about kicking a ball, shooting a basketball, right? Throwing a football, doing a bench press, doing a push-up. These are things that are a little larger, and you need to recruit many more muscle fibers. What are three types of muscle action? So these are very important for those that will continue to have a career in healthcare and or personal training, sports performance, whatever is your interest, physical therapy, strength and conditioning. These are things that you're always going to need to know, because these are different types of muscle actions that you will need to train at different phases of a program. Maybe a rehab needs to be specific on early eccentric and isometric work, and then transition into concentric movements. So let's break these down. So eccentric, I always remember eccentric as lengthening of the muscle, right? It's the muscle. If you think of a bicep curl, right? We're here at the very top. As that dumbbell lowers, right? We have lengthening of the bicep muscle. And this is with resistance or gravity. The muscle develops tension, but not enough to prevent the downward movement of resistance, right? So we're slow and controlled, lengthening the muscle. I gave an example, like I'm showing you now, bicep curl, lowering the weight nice and slow is going to cause that bicep to lengthen. Now let's talk about isometric. So iso, I think alone, I think static. Isometric is static, right? There's no change in the length of the muscle. It requires the development of muscular tension, but does not result in movement of the body. So think about a plank, for example. You're not moving any muscles. They're not shortening or lengthening, right? You're just kind of holding a static position, and your muscle fibers are being recruited, but we're not seeing any change in length of the muscle, right? Think about a wall sit, holding the very bottom of the squat for 5 seconds, right? There's an isometric pause at the very bottom of the squat. Holding the very top of a push-up will be kind of like a high plank. Things of that nature, right? Where we're not changing the length of the muscle, we see more isometric. So an example I have here in this slide is a bicep curl, right? Holding it at the very middle. So this is the very top. We know that eccentric is now lengthening of that muscle lengthening as you go through that range of motion. And now isometric would be just holding. So me just squeezing, holding this, right, is causing an isometric contraction, because my bicep, although it is being engaged and there is active tension going through it because I am squeezing it, there is no change in length, and we're doing an isometric contraction. I'm really just like causing a contraction without changing the length of the muscle. Now let's talk about concentric. So concentric is another type of muscle action that probably is easiest to remember, because concentric, I think of contract, right? We're seeing a contraction. So the muscle is shortening at the muscle belly with resistance or gravity. The muscle develops tension that is enough to overcome the resistance. That's where we see concentric power, right? If you pick up a real heavy dumbbell, and you're trying to do a bicep curl, right? If you can't overcome that force, right, because it's too heavy, you're not getting that concentric part, that shortening of the muscle. Whereas like if you pick something that's more within your weight range, right, and you're able to actually get from the very lengthened position to the very shortened position, that's where we see concentric. So once again, let's go through these real quick. Let's use a bicep curl for all three. We're going to do eccentric is, right, we got the lengthening of the muscle, right? Just that part. Reset, lengthen. That's eccentric. Isometric, we're just squeezing, we're just holding. The muscle is not changing in length. Concentric, we're at the very bottom, the lengthened position, and we're going through a shortening phase of that muscle to the very top. Now let's talk about muscle fiber types. So this is also important when it comes to muscle fiber recruitment, speed and power for a lot of our athletes, right? Having slow twitch, fast twitch, type 2A and type 2X are very different, right? They react differently. They produce different forces, low force, high force. One is more aerobically inclined, one is more anaerobically inclined, and some of them are a little more highly resistant to fatigue, and others are not as much. So let's go through these three different types of muscle fibers. So what we see here is slow twitch fiber to start. So this is a type 1, pretty much. Type 1 muscle fiber, and it contracts slowly and produces low amounts of force. It's highly fatigue resistant. What does that mean? That means it gets tired real easy, right? The many number of capillaries and blood inside gives these fibers a very red color. So if you were to look at these under a microscope, you'd see a very red because they're capillary dense. That just means they have a lot of blood vessels, right? A lot of blood is going through them. There's a lot of capillary beds there. There's a lot of transfer of blood in these areas. So you'll see a very red color looking type 1. They can produce large amounts of ATP aerobically, right? So they consume a lot of oxygen, making them beneficial for prolonged exercises like walking or jogging. So our slow twitch is something we'll see more so in our cross-country runners, people that cover miles and do a lot of reps and do a lot of more muscular endurance type athletes, right? Remember, endurance is multiple reps, long distances, long amounts of time, doing a lot of reps many times over. So we see that with walking, jogging, long distance running, marathons. Those are going to be people that have heavy or are more easily inclined to having slow twitch muscle fibers or type 1 muscle fibers. Now let's talk about fast twitch muscle fibers, which are things you might have heard a lot of explosive power athletes have. So we have a type 2A and a type 2X. Let's talk about type 2A. So a fast twitch type 2A muscle fiber contracts very rapidly and produces high amounts of force. And they are also fatigue resistant, right? Because of the ability to create force and produce power, right? They fatigue, they need bigger breaks. They appear light pink in color if you were to look at them under a microscope. And ATP is produced aerobically and anaerobically. So this is kind of like a hybrid. So it's not just aerobically like slow twitch, where it needs a lot of oxygen consumption to kick into effect. Now let's talk about fast twitch type 2X. So type 2X is probably the fastest and most rapidly contracting muscle fiber. It produces large amounts of force and fatigues very quickly as well. This is really only supplied by a few capillaries and appear to be very white in color. They produce ATP anaerobically, which makes sense because if the ones that are very aerobic dominant, right, they have large amounts of ATP aerobically, then that means we have a lot of capillaries and we have a lot of oxygen being used and a lot of oxygen being transferred within these muscle groups to react and create movement and contract at a certain rate. Because fast twitch type 2X muscle fiber is anaerobically, right? They produce ATP anaerobically only for a short period of time. It's beneficial for activities such as a big jump, like a vertical jump, just one rep, right? Sprinting, 40-meter dash. Olympic weightlifting, where it's like a technical movement, but it's explosive heavy weight, and we're doing that for 1 rep, right? Big, fast twitch, explosive. Think jumping up a box jump or taking off for a sprint. These are going to be activities that will tap into your fast twitch type 2X. And this is something that not everybody has a different ratio of these, right? Some people may be more inclined to have a 80% slow twitch fibers. Some people have 40% slow twitch and 40% fast twitch, but this changes. It's genetic factors, training, all this affects it over time. It's hard to really change one to another, but there is some research that shows that people that are a little more slow twitch and train a certain way can change those slow twitch to fast twitch muscle fibers over and convert them over because their body's adapting to the stresses they're applying to them. And those muscle fibers are converting over to be more type 2 and more anaerobic in nature. Let's look at some real life examples of an individual differences of different muscle fiber types that we just talked about. So we have marathon runners, like I mentioned. Marathon runners have primarily slow twitch fibers because they are aerobically dominant. They're not doing anything fast and short and explosive. It's for miles at a time. They're running. It's rep after rep, right? For long periods of time, long distances. So they'll have more, and they're training in a state that will allow them to train those slow twitch fibers and maintain them over time. Whereas like they wouldn't be really good off the line on a sprint because of those predominant slow twitch fibers in their body. And now let's look at an elite 100-meter sprinter, right? This is a short distance realistically compared to a marathon. And these people have way more fast twitch muscle fibers because they need that, right? Their sport is specific to how they're training, and they're training in a way to enhance more fast twitch muscle fibers, right? And the recruitment of those fast twitch muscle fibers allows them to be excellent 100-meter sprinters because these fast twitch fibers are reactive, right? They can react anaerobically and aerobically, and they can use these systems, energy systems, to get them better scores, better times on their 100-meter sprint. And their training has shown to cause some conversion between, this is what I was mentioning in the last slide, type 2A and type 2X muscle fibers. Even with this conversion, genetics do predetermine our muscle fiber types. So you will most likely have about a very similar blueprint of your muscle fibers because of your parents. So if both of your parents were more fast twitch muscle fiber individuals, then you will be more likely to have those fast type 2A, type 2X muscle fibers. Whereas like if both your parents had more slow twitch, then you will be probably more predisposed to having those slow twitch fibers. Yes, there is research, like I said before, to cause some conversion between type 2A and type 2X, but this is very minimal and we don't see this in every population. Let's talk about recruitment. So remember, I was saying how our brain sends this message to our motor units and our muscles, and it helps recruit muscle fibers, right? This recruitment of muscle fibers helps that lengthening, shortening, isometric contraction of the muscle, which helps us produce force or create movement in space. Fiber recruitment involves more muscle fibers to produce an increased muscular force. As intensity of activity increases, different muscle fiber types are recruited. We have low intensity exercise only recruits slow twitch fibers, right? So if you're just jogging around, you're really not tapping into any of your type 2A or type 2X. So your body's going to first go through its type 1. It's going to fatigue that. Then it'll try and recruit type 2A. And lastly, it'll try and recruit type 2X. It's important to note that muscle fibers make up an individual's muscle so that we can apply the appropriate stimulus. For example, the soleus is primarily a type 1 muscle. What was type 1 again, right? This is a slow twitch fiber. Our soleus is a calf muscle that helps us plantar flex the foot and helps us in walking, in gait, in running, right? It's a muscle that we walk around. Think about how often do we walk around? All day, right? There's people that walk around all day. It's something we do all the time. It's not like we go and do bench press every day or we go sprint every day, but walking is something we need to be able to do over and over and over and over again without fatiguing easily, because our body doesn't like to be inefficient. So your soleus is naturally primarily a type 1 and always will be more primarily a type 1 muscle fiber because of this, because of ambulation and walking around all day and the purpose it has and the importance it has in your gait cycle, right? So this is something that gets rep all the time. If you were in a wheelchair all day, this is a different story, but the soleus, if you're walking around all the time, you're something that gets a lot of reps, hundreds and thousands of reps a week. And it's something that needs to be more type 1. So it does not fatigue super easily, right? This is the one that's highly resistant to fatigue. It can do things for long periods of time. Now let's talk about the all or none principle. This is something you'll hear going forward if you continue in exercise science majors, PT programs, AT programs. So take note of this. The all or none principle is when all the fibers of a motor unit contract to develop force together. So when you're getting just enough stimulus to cause a contraction, you either get enough stimulus to cause a contraction or none at all. That's just how this works. Skeletal muscle system is regulated voluntarily through the central nervous system. So what that is saying is that if you don't have enough of a stimulus, your central nervous system, your CNS, is not going to allow that muscle to produce force and create. You need a level, you need a certain amount of weight to cause some type of force. Let's say, for example, you drop something in my hand. That has to be enough of a stimulus to tell my brain, like, okay, catch this ball, create contraction in your biceps so that your arm doesn't just drop to the ground when that ball hits your hand, right? So that's the all or none principle. We decide how much effort to apply to a given activity and therefore the number of fibers that it will be recruited, right? Your brain is also going to be smart in the sense of it's not going to recruit muscle fibers that it doesn't need, right? If you're picking up a pencil off the ground, you need very minimal stimulus. The stimulus is so small that you don't need as much motor unit recruitment from that muscle contraction. Whereas like if you're now pushing a real heavy sled or pushing a car, for example, right? Your brain is going to need to, it has a big stimulus and it's going to need to recruit as much muscle fibers as possible to create a contraction that's going to be able to develop a lot of force to move that vehicle. So let's recap on muscular strength. Muscular strength is the amount of muscle force determined by the size and number of fibers recruited during the contraction, with size being the primary factor, right? So size plays a big role in how much muscle fibers are, right? If you have big muscles, you have big cross sectional muscle fiber recruitment. So, right, the more mass you have, the more muscle fibers you have, the ability to produce, to have strength and produce muscular force is enhanced, right? This is what determines it, with size being the primary factor, like I said. When comparative to females, so when we're talking about females, when we're comparing males and females, males do tend to have more muscle mass just biologically. This is something we've known for a long time. And this can be attributed to our hormonal processes. Men just happen to have higher levels of testosterone, and that is what contributes to allowing us to build bigger muscles and get stronger, right? Big muscles are strong muscles. And if you have, for example, testosterone, which helps increase the size of your muscle, you will have an advantage biologically, right? And females, we only really see females with really, really large muscles when they are supplementing with some type of testosterone or a human growth hormone and taking hormones realistically that males naturally produce at a higher rate and using it to enhance their physique and their body. That's really when you only see females have more muscle mass than men. Biologically, without any supplementation, males will always have more muscle mass. Okay, so let's catch our breath and let's reset and review real quick. Let's talk about what our 3 muscle actions are. So let's recap real quick. We have our eccentric, we have our isometric, and we have our concentric. So for eccentric muscle movement, muscle action, remember, We have lengthening of the muscle, and this is at any muscle. I know I'm using the bicep because it's easy one to show you on camera, but think about any muscle lengthening. Think about your hamstring, for example, right? Lengthening, right? Stretching, kicking that knee out. Think about a knee extension. As you do a knee extension or a quad set or something, you're lengthening that hamstring. That hamstring is coming to a length as you kick out. That is our eccentric. It's our lengthening of the muscle. Now we have isometric. Remember, that's a consistent hold. Think about doing a plank or a wall sit, where the muscle's not changing in length. It's not shortening. It's not lengthening. It's staying about the same, but muscle fibers are still being recruited. So it is a type of muscle action because there is contraction going on. There is a level of fatigue that will set in for sure, right? And then we have concentric, right? Or concentric is easy to remember because it's contraction. Think about the shortening of the muscle, right? As the bicep curl is coming to the very top, that bicep is shortening, right? The ends of those of that muscle is coming closer together. It's sandwiching. So think about concentric contraction is a shortening of the muscle. Eccentric is a lengthening, and isometric is a constant, consistent, unchanging length, but it's still a contraction. It's still a muscle action. We're still going to have a level of fatigue. What is muscle fiber recruitment? So this is where our body decides how much stimulus we need to create movement or produce a force, to put it in better terms. Muscle fiber recruitment has a large role is played by the CNS, your central nervous system, right? Think about the all-or-none principle we just covered, right? You need a large enough stimulus to recruit enough muscle fibers to be able to push a heavy box or push a heavy car or lift a heavy weight. So that's muscle fiber recruitment. Your brain is actively sending a message to recruit muscle fibers because the stimulus, right? If you push on a empty cardboard box, right? That stimulus is so light that it's not, your brain can easily just recruit very minimal muscle fibers for that. Whereas like now you have a 400-pound box that you have to move or 1,000-pound car that you're going to push, right? That stimulus is going to tell your brain like, okay, oh crap, like I need to produce more of this. I need to recruit more muscle fibers, maybe as many as possible so that you can create force and move this object in space. So muscle fiber recruitment, all it is think about the all-or-none principle, right? You need a stimulus so that you can recruit the right amount of muscle fibers so that you can move an object or do an exercise or produce force. And what are 3 muscle fiber types? So remember, we have our type 1, and that's going to be our slow twitch muscle fiber, right? These are very highly resistant to fatigue, right? They can do a lot. Think about your soleus muscle. You're walking around all day. The soleus is a primarily type 1 muscle. It doesn't fatigue easily. It does a lot all day. It's trained to do this. We have our type 2A, right? So this is our fast twitch. We're getting into our fast twitch fibers now. And type 2A is a little more anaerobic than type 1 and still a little aerobic. And remember, all of these, think about the color under a microscope. Like, right, our slow twitch is going to be highly capillary dense. We're going to have a lot of blood. It's going to be really red. You know, type 2A is going to be a light pink, like very light pink, not really red under a microscope. And those are a little more fatiguing. They get tired more easily than your type 1. Your type 1 is, remember, long reps, think muscle endurance for your type 1. Think muscle strength for your type 2, muscle power, explosive power. And then we have our type 2X, which is even faster. It's even more fast twitch. Our bodies don't have a lot of these, right? And remember that all of these 3 types, type 1, type 2, type 2X, type 2A, type 2X, they're all predetermined by your genetics. You can change slightly some of them through your training and the forces you apply your body and how your body adapts to those forces and exercises over time. You can get some conversion of one to another, but this is not everyone. So just remember type 1, right? Type 2A, type 2X. So we got type 1 is our slow twitch, type 2A, type 2X are fast twitch muscle fibers. An example would be a marathon runner would have more slow twitch fibers, and a 100-meter sprinter will have way more type 2A and type 2X fibers because it's what they train to do, and they have more of those fibers, and they're good at those sports because they have more. They're better at these events because they are